So welcome everyone to Sharks and Heels, Hiring a Shark edition. Today our special guest is Bri Crow. I will tell you a little bit about her so that we can have a good introduction. Bri's mission is to be a creative catalyst for creative connection for growth-focused companies and individuals. She is a multi-passionate professional and creative, and her parent company, Bri Crow Co., includes talent attraction and acquisition services for businesses, a creative services studio, and local media production services. Previously, Bri has spent 10 years in the technical staffing industry, including recruiting and sales roles. And most recently, she was recruited to join a cybersecurity company startup. And while she was there, within 2 years, that cybersecurity startup, she helped build that into a $10 million business. She's been featured in Dallas Innovates, Voyages Dallas, and Dynamic Foundations Institute. She is a highly talented and accomplished photographer, and you can see her photographs at Forbes.com, Fort Worth Magazine, and on the cover of an Amazon chart-topping book. She has been nominated for the North Texas Women in Technology Awards, and she is a recipient of a Succeed by Servicing Award. You can find out more about Human Dimensions, Bri Crow Creative Studios, or Local and Thriving, her podcast, by emailing her at hello@brico.co or connecting with her on LinkedIn. And I have to say, I'm not at all biased towards the Local and Thriving podcast, because it's not like I was featured on an episode or anything.
It was such a good episode too. And I'm like over here blushing. Yes, no, it was, I was so grateful to have you, because you had such a great perspective on being able to help local businesses from a legal perspective when it came to the PPE loans and all of that. You had such good insight as to the very quickly evolving market around that.
Changing every second government loan programs, right? I mean, we were pretty lucky that we were able to pivot quickly enough to, I would like to think, be really helpful to a lot of people who are trying to navigate that stuff. But if you are a business or a startup out there and you're not checking out the Local and Thriving podcast, you are missing out, because as a multi-passionate professional and creative, Bri has lots of contacts into the local community, and that is a little treasure trove of resources of different people around the DFW area that are really plugged in, and if you're not checking it out, you're missing it out.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It was definitely a passion project that I just wanted to get the information out there. So yeah, hopefully it's valuable.
So being that today our focus is on hiring and recruiting, I wanted to just sort of kind of address the shall we say, pandemic in the room and talk a little bit about how, this collective joint experience, no matter how you feel about COVID and vaccines or not vaccines, but how this collective business of the pandemic for the last 2 years has changed sort of the culture of how we work and the way in which businesses manage their employees.
Truly, it's been the most interesting recruiting market that I've recruited in. I've said that other times, but it was different just based on where talent was going. This, in terms of both employers and with candidates, every call is different, and every company is handling things differently right now, honestly, because so many companies are trying to figure out their own processes in terms of their culture and how they're working through things, that they're, in some ways asking me, like, what are you hearing? What are other companies doing? And trying to crowdsource information, which in some ways I'm grateful to see happening, because that's the only way that we're going to really be able to, figure out the best information, is being able to learn from each other. And so the biggest thing that I've seen, obviously, several of my clients were 100% on site before COVID. And so for them, I was curious as to seeing how they were going to pivot and how well it was going to work for their culture. And, since then I've helped them hire multiple people, and having them not only go through a full interview process all virtually, but then having people start and being virtual and never having met them, I think has been an interesting thing. But so far it does seem to have gone smoothly. I think there's been some, I don't know if I'm going to say they're hiccups, but, learning lessons from candidates doing what they can to take advantage of working 100% remote and working potentially a couple of different jobs, full-time jobs at the same time. We've seen that happen. And that's something where employers are trying to figure out what that looks like for what questions you can ask in order to understand where are our employees actually located, right? Like that actually matters from a tax perspective. So for them, they're trying to figure out, okay, we are 100% remote, but like your address says you're in Dallas. Are you actually in Denver? If so, that's fine, but we do need to know that, or are you international? That's a whole other cybersecurity concern.
Sure.
Or are you working multiple jobs? So I think there's just a lot of questions that may not used to be asked that are now having to be asked.
Do you find that would you say there's a trend towards employees really wanting to continue to work at home, or do you see like a trend of people really wanting to get back to traditional work life, and have that more maybe clear delineation between life at home and life at work?
So I honestly think that the biggest average is hybrid. I think a lot of people really do like the camaraderie of being in the office. They like being able to knock out a bunch of meetings within a couple of days in the office and then work from home when they're not. They feel like it kind of breaks up or focuses, I should say, their meeting time rather than it being stretched out all the time in meetings. They feel like, okay, if I know that every day Tuesday or every week Tuesday, Thursdays are going to be our meeting days, they feel like it allows them more flexibility to actually get the work done outside of those meetings when they're working remotely. All that to say, I do definitely talk with a candidate here and there who's only looking at 100% remote roles, or who is just desperate to get back into the office. They're like, my partner works from home. I would love to go into an office. I am ready. But I think the biggest thing is hybrid. And so for a lot of companies, that can look like them trying to decide, do I actually keep paying rent or keep our actual physical office, or do we look at then investing in having a budget for co-working that allows their employees, if they do want a hybrid model, being able to pick a co-working space that's closest to their home and going in and that being their version of hybrid. That's something that I've seen people look at as well.
Yeah, it's definitely been interesting. In my just among my professional friends, I have one friend who she is now the only person in the Dallas office on her team. And so she's just been fine working from home, but now they're back to in person. And she's like, I don't understand why I have to be there in the office. There's no one else for me to interact with. So she's like got like kind of the worst of both, because she's going to the office, but there's no one there.
Like I'm saying hi to the security guard.
So it's definitely been interesting. So you've had such a range of experience, not just in the HR field, talent acquisition. What was it that when you came out of sort of just pure recruiting and then went to work for the cybersecurity company, what is it that inspired you, or what drew you to the idea of having human dimensions as your own sort of baby?
Okay, I absolutely love that question because it really gets to that's what gets me so excited, because I think that A lot of candidates have worked with a lot of really bad recruiters, unfortunately, who either have misrepresented their experience, which, I think the role of a recruiter can be so important because I take my job very seriously in the sense that I'm representing someone's career achievements, what you have done. And if I don't hype that up in the right way, or if I set you up and say that you're really strong in a certain skill set, but it's really not something that you're strong in, that makes for an awkward interview. So I think from that perspective, I titled it Human Dimensions because I think the human element is often lost in the hiring process. I've heard for how many years now that I'm going to lose, recruiters aren't going to be necessary anymore because technology is going to take it over. Hiring managers will tell you that they don't love that. They may try it out, understandably so. If it can cut costs, I understand seeing if that's going to work for your business. However, there is such a human element, especially when we're talking about direct hire full-time positions where you're looking for someone to hire them and to stay with the business for at least 3 to 5 years. And so I really think that there's the human element in hiring that needs to be considered. So for me, that means conversations with the employers around, okay, you've sent me the job description and you told me that you're adding to your team, but what is the actual projects that you're trying to do? What's the mission of the business right now? Are you trying to bring in more business? Or are you trying to take care of your customers better, right? Like, what is the actual business problems currently that you need someone to come in and help with? And also, what's the mission of the company? Like, what are you passionate about and trying to do in the world? And then taking that to a conversation with a candidate and saying, say you get 3 offers that are, and this is the most important question that I ask candidates, and I tell them that this is the most important question. If you were to get 3 offers that were all, say they wanted a hybrid environment, if you say, let's say you get 3 offers that are all at $80,000, their goal salary, and a hybrid environment, how would you go about deciding what position to go with and to start? And because that gets to the core of like, does it matter? Do you care about your coworkers most? Do you care about your ability to elevate yourself within as titles? Because people will tell me, I'm looking for growth. What does growth mean to you? Growth can look very different for other people. Is that growth in compensation? Is that growth in terms of in 2 years, you want to pivot your career into this other direction? It can mean a lot. So really aligning those elements and getting more to the heart of what is a candidate motivated by and what is a company's mission. And so for me, there's a lot of dimensions at play. And if those aren't considered, you're not going to have someone that's really invested in the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that because I think for a while, you're in the industry, so you'll know the timelines better. But for a while, there was kind of this over reliance upon technology to filter through resumes, and this idea that people can just apply, and then like this computer software program will just suddenly magically your perfect candidate will appear. But
Right.
we all know that a person is so much more than what's on their resume, and particularly if you're a smaller company, that person's entire personality comes to work with with that resume, right?
Yeah. So something that you said that I think is really important is the companies that relied on the technology and those applicant tracking systems to find the best candidates, then very quickly realized the quality of those applicants to be able to then be able to be sorted relied on their employer brand, relied on their website, relied on what do people know of them? Because if people don't know you, or if people don't know what it's like to work for you, they don't know about your culture. If that's not being represented outside of just your website that's selling to your customers, then you're probably not going to get good applicants that can't even be filtered. So then they realize there's like that chicken and egg problem, like, oh, we've got this technology, it's going to be great, it's going to sort our resumes. But what resumes is it sorting? Is it actually sorting your ideal candidate that wants to work for you with the right skill set? Is a different story.
Right. So I know that the news has been covering a lot about how tight the job market is right now. And a lot of our clients, since we work with small businesses, a lot of our clients are screaming right now that their pain point post, if we can say this is post-pandemic, but post-pandemic has really been finding employees to work at their company, and they went from a like struggling to keep people employed and having to maybe lay off some people to now, struggling to get people to work for them so that they can take advantage of the market opening up. So from your perspective, how have you seen that job market tightening affect recruiting and talent acquisition?
So this is purely anecdotal. I will say everything that I'm about to say is just 100% anecdotal from conversations, because I don't know if I can necessarily pinpoint it. I think, an interesting quote that I saw was, "It's not the great resignation, it's the workforce revolution," which I found really interesting because, 20 years ago, when layoffs were happening, employees that used to work for a lifetime with a company and retire with that company, when they would start getting laid off, they realized, wait, it's not about the company. And then they start thinking of themselves. And I kind of think that we're somehow back, we're back there. We had been already a little bit, but right now, I think there's an element of, I don't want to be, if I'm gainfully employed and I've been with this company and they've kept me on throughout COVID, I don't know if I right now want to be the last in and the first out should something happen. So there might be a loyalty to a company saying, I appreciate them for keeping me on throughout COVID. This is good. And, I'm good enough happy. Or I don't want to be the last in and first out in a move. Or, I honestly think that a lot of companies did step up how they treat their employees more now than I ever have heard. I've heard replies from candidates who I'm reaching out to and trying to recruit for my clients. And more often than I ever used to get, I will get a response saying, "Thank you so much for reaching out, but I'm not interested. I'm happy where I'm at." Interesting. So I think that companies took it a little pretty seriously, or it just kind of started to stand out in terms of who, treating folks really well. And they're like, I've got everything that I need. All that to say, if I were offering 30K more, who knows if that's,
Sure.
changes the game a little bit.
Sure.
But the, and the other thing, I think a big piece of that conversation is technical talent, which we already had an issue with. Companies that didn't have a digital presence or weren't investing in technology before COVID, and we already had a tight market, then experienced COVID and said, well, we didn't even have a website or an app to be able to have this loyalty. We need to have that. We didn't have a digital strategy. Now we need a digital strategy. We need to create content. Now all of a sudden they realize that they need to be doing those things. And so you're adding on to an existing kind of tight market on top of companies realizing that their digital presence and their technical solutions were a big deal because all of our employees need to be remote and they all need to take home laptops and have safe VPNs to where from a cybersecurity perspective, we're covered and all these other technical solutions. We don't even have somebody that can deploy all of that for us. Wait a second. So I think there's a lot of just different factors that come into play.
So we talked a little bit about we touched on this earlier, but I just wanted to take a little bit of a deep dive here. So if I'm a business, let's say a small business or a startup, and we're trying to recruit people, what are some of the essential questions that employers fail to really ask themselves, or they don't really think through, that they need to think through and ask themselves before they even post a job out there?
So I think in a lot of ways it is, what do they have the time to potentially train someone to, because top talent can look different for every company. Being a small business, my small to medium sized business clients who have less than 40 employees, which are a lot of the companies that I work with, were earlier this year feeling like they were getting poached left and right from big companies like a Home Depot and a Capital One, who didn't used to allow remote work, now are allowing remote work. So now they're reaching out to everybody and they have massive budgets. So they were being able to throw money at candidates and offer, they were already working remotely, but if you offer somebody 30K more, it kind of gets hard to turn down. But that's somebody who's really driven by that. And I think you can, so by top talent, I just mean you can find someone who's incredibly motivated, has the right attitude and a base level of skill set to be able to train them up that is within your budget. You have to think about, A, what can you afford? And what do you need them immediately being able to do within that first 30 days to make sure that it's adding value to you? But what could you, over the course of 6 months, ramp them up on, and really build a loyal employee who's grateful to you for giving them extra skills and adding to their resume and experience. So I think, what would I be able to train and ramp someone up on? And then a second thing is realizing, what can I offer someone outside of just compensation? Because a lot of candidates really value, I'll have people who are making $250,000 at a company, absolutely bored to tears, or has done this incredible transformation project, and then no one recognized it, no one knew who they were, and they didn't feel seen for this 80-hour work weeks, not 80 hour, but crazy work weeks. So they'll leave and take a pay cut gladly to come in and make a change, be impactful, to build something. And that's where I would encourage startups and small business owners. It's not only about money. You really need to lean into finding the right talent that is interested in doing those kinds of things, being a firefighter, being the builder, and wanting to show something that they can do. And obviously, I do think benefits and healthcare insurance do play a part in it. All too often, and I've experienced this myself, 401k programs and matching programs tend to be a little tough for small to medium sized businesses. I've honestly never worked for a company myself that had, like, outside of, you can contribute to your 401k, like, um, but I think a couple of things that I've encouraged startups and small businesses to do, or look at those pools where you're able to work with, I think Insperity might be one of them, where you're able to get lumped in with a bunch of other small businesses to then get even better insurance programs that help you compete, from that perspective. Those are a couple of the main things I'd think of.
That's a really great tip, especially if you are a smaller business and you feel like you can't really compete on the benefits. Looking into some of those pooling programs can be really a sort of an equalizer, where you can at least offer something where you might not have been able to offer it if you hadn't looked into that. So I think that's a really great tip.
And I would say too, my last thing I would say for other ways to look at it, boot camp graduates from coding boot camps, or from, there are people, I think they're a fantastic solution for startups and small to medium sized businesses, because most likely those people already have professional experience. If you're a startup or a small business, you can't afford someone who's been an industry veteran within the specific niche that you're looking to hire, but you can hire someone who has 5 years of professional experience, to where you can trust them to show up, get the job done, speak professionally with clients and whatnot. But they're most likely taking a pay cut because they've just tried to do this career transition. And now they have a little bit of a taste of the skills that you might be looking for, whether that be from a data analyst perspective, UX design, development. You do get what you pay for. You don't necessarily want a bootcamp graduate developing your whole app necessarily. I would say up to your MVP. At least help them create your MVP. It may not be the app that you take to market, but you get where I'm going with that. I think bootcamp graduates are a great resource.
So given that the job market is so tight, and like you said, candidates are being pickier, right? And they're maybe hesitant to leave a position they feel is somewhat secure for something that frankly is a little bit unknown. What are things that a potential employer can be sure to include, or what are some tips of how to write a great job description that will attract candidates who may not be maybe necessarily considering a career move, but are just sort of perusing through to see what's out there, so that they see it and they're like, oh, that might be something I want to consider over the safety of necessarily where I am right now?
That's a great question, Mishty. Great question. um, you know, I'll kind of go back to, what I mentioned of you really have to play to, okay, I'll take a step back. I really encourage companies to create candidate profiles before they create a job description. And what I mean by that is, okay, we know we're going to need to hire two people. We're going to need to hire a salesperson and we need to hire a back office operations person. Create a candidate profile for each of those because they're driven by entirely different things. And so this is the long-winded answer to your question, but for a salesperson, they're going to be motivated by, do you have subscriptions? Are you willing to spend money on lead generation sources? Or do you have a program in place for being able to keep track of your customers for them to keep their notes? They're going to be driven by that and commission opportunity and some other things if we're generalizing. A back office operations person is going to be motivated by the potential to maybe create standardized processes. They might be able to want to come in and clean things up. They're driven by organization, but also making sure, do we have the investment or the right software, or can I help select the right software to be used, right? And they might be motivated by that stability and flexibility. I'm just generalizing. Knowing that those are two different things that they're motivated by, when you're writing that job description, you want it to speak to that person. You want to speak in their language and saying, for the right salesperson, we have XYZ in place, or for the right person, we want you to help us select the right lead generation programs for us to invest in, to where, right? That's for somebody who's right now maybe not being heard at all, and they're being forced to this other stuff, and they're like, wait, this person's letting me tell them where the best lead generation platforms are, and they're willing to invest in it. That's interesting. So speaking to them in their job description. So start with a candidate profile to know what they're motivated by and what you need them to do, and then use that in your job description to where someone's reading it, and if they're not being currently valued or have that impact input being compensated for what they do well, they're going to see your description and say, that seems like an opportunity for me to actually thrive.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but at the end of the day, everyone wants to be appreciated for the work that they do. And so maybe employers are starting to realize that they have to do a little bit more to show that they will appreciate work that people are doing for them in order to attract the right person for the role.
Yeah. I mean, because I think, it's been said a lot that I can't remember like phrasing or whatnot, but it's like, what's your dream job? And a lot of people are like, my dream job is like to not have a job, to like just live and not have to work. But like, we have to have a job. Okay. So knowing that we have to have a job, I don't want to be at a job that doesn't even care that I'm there, So I think, if there's ways to do that, it like employee of the month, I feel like is one of those things where it's like, it's whatever. But if you just said, oh, they're our employee of the month, then yeah, it's probably not going to give you anything. Again, this is a free way. But if you do a Zoom call, announce the person who's the employee of the month, have people hype them up on the call and say, by the way, I really loved your contributions here. I love that. This is a free opportunity. And you're just spending the whole 15-minute Zoom hyping that person up and making them feel seen. Done.
Yeah.
That's a way to do employee of the month.
So what are some places, like you just mentioned, like coding boot camps? What are some other places that maybe an employer who doesn't know better that they're overlooking, right? Because everyone's postings sort of sometimes get aggregated into simply hired or whatever. But what are some smaller, more targeted job posting forums that employers are maybe not thinking about posting on? Or how, if I'm an employer, how do I find those sort of niche platforms which are more targeted to the types of candidates that I'm looking for, as opposed to just putting it everywhere. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
My first thought is kind of, and I'm apparently just gonna to just keep talking about this, but a big piece is like finding where those people are spending their time. So for me, for example, when I was in sales roles, and I'm trying to find new companies to help hire talent. So I'm like, okay, outside of me cold calling based on this, we have a software that tells us all these companies and how many jobs they may have open. Instead of me cold calling them and getting definitely ignored for sure, where are they spending their time with their peers? Okay, tech conferences and user groups. So I was going to tech conferences and user groups, whether I was spending my own money or being able to expense it. To me, it didn't really matter. And that just benefit, because my competitors were never there. I don't know how, but I was one of the only recruiters there, but I was also there to learn about their industry and understand a little bit more about it. Obviously that's just from a sales perspective, but if you are an entrepreneur, you are you are a salesperson numero uno. So I understand that that's a time investment outside of being able to post. So we'll take that off the table. That's my kind of like first thought. But I do think meetup.com right now, I think it's a big opportunity. I say that as someone who is recruiting software architects for a startup that has a lot of investment money. And I'm going on meetup.com, seeing the organizers, going to their profile, that then takes me to their Twitter, that then takes me to their website, and then I'm sending them a recruiting email. I was hearing back from people 80% of the time doing that. So if you get involved in a local meetup and you take part in discussions, or maybe it's Slack groups. There's a DFW startup community Slack channel that has been around, has a couple of thousand people that are in it, specifically for startups. And there's a jobs channel within that of people talking about the positions they're hiring for. So you can throw up a post there and throw up a mention. And then the other thing really is social recruitment marketing. Outside of your job post being published on LinkedIn, I think being willing to do a video. I know people are like, ooh, that's a no for me. I hear you, I understand it, but I do think it would be an impactful video and content for the hiring manager or somebody from the team, making a video talking about things that you're looking for and what you're hiring for. That will go further than just your job description. It is so much more dynamic, and again, would be something free. Those are a couple of things. I feel like I'm going to have some lingering ones, but those are some initial like creative solutions.
Sure. So we got a question actually from one of our participants here, and
Good.
they are trying to compete. Like if you're a small company, and we've touched on it a little bit, but we can go a little bit deeper. If you're a small company and you're trying to compete against a large company like an Amazon or a LinkedIn, like some Google or whatever it is, Microsoft, right? And we're trying to compete for the same talent, but you can't afford to offer that salary or that signing bonus. What are some things that will make you will attract some of those potential MVP candidates away from someone like a Microsoft or an Amazon to a smaller company, even if you're not able to offer that same pay?
Okay, so I'm going to answer this in a way that might not be the answer based on somebody's like current situation. This may not apply, so then I'll try to answer it in a different way. My first thought is, if you don't need them full time, if you're willing to, if you need talent like that, you've maybe got something big going on, but maybe it's a short-term need where you need them to come in, get it done, and move on. One of the biggest things that is an opportunity right now for small to medium-sized businesses and entrepreneurs is taking advantage of them being able to moonlight. If you're open to them working 5 to 9, and maybe you changing your business, I don't know, but if you're open to them moonlighting, I talk to candidates all the time who aren't willing to make a move for the job that I'm calling them about, but they're like, hey, if you ever know of any, part-time consulting work, by moonlighting, I just mean it's after hours for them, after work hours, then I would definitely be interested, and they'll have an hourly rate, and that hourly rate might be something that's a little bit more digestible, and also something where you're like, all right, I don't have to put out $100,000 salary. I could at least, get them to come in, knock it out within 3 months. That's one way that I think about it. The other solution is, I'll be honest, you're not going to like this answer. I honestly, I don't heavily recruit talent from Microsoft and Google. Like when I'm helping my clients hire, if I see someone's at Amazon Web Services, or if I see someone's at Google, I only recruit them if they have been there for like over 5 years. If they've been there 5 to 10 years, I'll reach out to them, because most likely at that point, they've had enough time to get sick of the red tape, get sick of being very niche in terms of maybe their job is now so specific that they're wanting to say, all right, now that I know this and I'm really great at it, I want to go somewhere where I can apply all the things that I'm good at. So I'm very intentional about, if I see you're at Amazon Web Services, you went through no less than 15 interviews to get that job. You were very intentionally working at Amazon Web Services, but if they've been there for just a little bit of time, now might be an opportunity to reach out. And that first line to them, if I am reaching out to them, is saying, hey, are you ready to take what you've learned at Amazon Web Services and apply it in a bigger way? That's my line, So I hope that answers it a little bit. I'm happy to chat about more. I wasn't paying attention to the chat. My apologies.
That's all right. So one more question that I kind of wanted to ask is, what's your role as when you're describing your company in talent attraction and acquisition services for business? What's your role, and when is someone using services like the one that you provide?
Yeah. So, first question was what my role. Okay. So rather than just being a technical staffing and recruiting agency, which is what my background has been and what I've been a part of, I really built Human Dimensions as a talent attraction and acquisition agency, because that talent attraction piece was getting lost in terms of telling the story of your business, who you are, what you're looking for. So we have a suite of services that start with building your candidate profiles, to doing job description audits. A lot of the times we all do it. You copy and paste from inspiration from other companies' job descriptions to build your own, which is fine. But then you might look at 3 years down the road and you're like, oh, all of our job descriptions read entirely differently. And so doing a job description audit, and then creating, consistent job descriptions and job ads for companies. So in some ways we look at being outsourced talent acquisition, where we handle everything up until that hire is made for recruitment and talent acquisition, where in that case, most often times working with the COO who doesn't have an in-house HR person, and they're looking to outsource the talent piece. If they're going to be hiring 5 to 10 people that year, then that solution makes sense, rather than paying per hire for recruiters on a contingent basis. But then also in terms of when we're generally engaged, most of the companies that we work with, anywhere from, sometimes it's 3 million and up. It can be less, but I think and oftentimes in that situation, I'll do a workshop that's more defined and saying, here's how I would approach a hiring strategy, and working with them to craft that to where they can hopefully go and take and recruit on their own, rather than paying, 15 to 20% fees on a hire. And to go into that 15 to 20% is a fee based on the first annual salary of the employee that you hire, that a recruiter is presented to you. So a lot of the times either working with companies who are looking at, again, making at least 3 hires, if not more, within a year is generally when we might be engaged in trying to understand, do they just need contingent support, or are we looking at being sometimes, not to go off topic, but sometimes a lot of clients have a really diverse workforce, whether that be nationwide or international. And they're also looking for help around interviewing tactics and virtual interviewing tactics, because no one's taught to interview. We're just promoted or take on the jobs that we do. And all of a sudden you got to hire and no one's told you how. So we've done workshops around being able to interview confidence from the hiring manager's perspective, or also looking at it from an inclusive perspective and making sure that you're being inclusive from your interview, starting at your interview tactics. So
Right. That actually kind of leads into the next question that I had set up, which
yeah.
is, so, we talked about the things that you want to ask yourself as an employer before you post a job, then, the job posting itself, how to make it enticing in a very competitive job market. And then, like you said, a lot of people are saying no, but from an employer's perspective, that question that you asked earlier, like if you had 3 jobs that offered you the same amount of money, what would be your, the same title, what would be your deciding factor? What are some questions that employers, once they get to the interview stage and they've already vetted, the backgrounds of the candidates, the qualifications of the candidates, so the people they're interviewing are all qualified for the job. What are some questions, or what are some interview fails that employers are making when they get that opportunity to see a bunch of candidates that they could be doing better in order to hire the right person when they're picking from qualified people?
So you didn't ask this, but I think it's important to make sure you try to ask the same questions to every candidate, to where you're able to compare their answers against each other. So that just inherently builds in an opportunity to compare, because you'll know it. Like, the right candidate will answer in the way where you're like, yes. But the biggest thing is asking yes or no questions. You really want to make sure asking open-ended questions, and then you're driving the interview, but ideally you're talking the least. So I will have candidates tell me, I call candidates after their interview, hey, how'd it go? What did you think? And I'll have candidates have said a couple of things. Sometimes candidates are like, well, I didn't really talk that much, but I have a really good idea of the role and the company, and it's definitely something that I'm interested in. And I think it went well. And I'm like, and then the client will say, yeah, I just don't think that they're really a fit. And I'm like, wait, what? How did that, or they're like, yeah, they were amazing. And it's still one of those things where if the candidate's telling me that they barely talked at all, like, but they know a lot about the job, then they haven't been vetted. But the client, much like if you're in dating, right? The person who's getting asked a lot of questions or is talking the most generally ends up having a feeling of, this was amazing, this person's great. But they weren't actually really. So all that to say, you're driving the interview and you're making sure you're reining it in and harnessing, you're driving a direction, and where you're trying to take the interview to find out specific information. But ideally, you're talking the least. So asking an open-ended question, letting them answer. And if they continue into detail, I think the follow-up questions of, can you tell me more about that? What about, and then you extract a specific piece of information they mentioned that was interesting. So you mentioned this, I'd love to hear more about what you did there or how you did that. And, those types of questions are going to elicit a lot more information. And the more comfortable that you can make a candidate feel, honestly, the more honest, for better or for worse, that they may be in an interview. Take it from someone who oftentimes makes people feel very comfortable, which then leads to just some off the rails stuff. And then you got to decide, was it off the rails? And that's going to be common or whatnot. But open source questions. And then I'll end with, we got to ask the logistics questions. I think that's the thing that I hear oftentimes is money hasn't been talked about maybe until third interview or something. And then you've maybe potentially wasted time. They've potentially wasted time. I think not being afraid to talk about money early on. And then also some of the questions that will trip you up the most are like, when would you be prepared to start a new position? That question might be like, oh, well, actually in 3 months, I'm getting a bonus. So I'd like to stick around until then. But then, yeah, I could start. And you're like, oh, I was hoping, someone could start within 2 weeks, if that is the case. So I think some of those logistics questions is definitely some things that are often, because I also ask too, do you have any extended vacations coming up where you're going to be out for more than 5 days? It's an important question because all of a sudden some people are, with remote work, who knows what that looks like. So Fractional HR company. So I've actually been vetting some myself, trying to figure out, I think several of my clients use Breezy HR and I think it's Jazz HR. Yes, those are the two, and they're open source. And I think that they're budget friendly in terms of candidate stuff as well as HR stuff. And then I also, if you're looking at recruiting stuff, I've also looked at Smart Recruiters platform. So those would be my top 3 probably. I feel like and honestly, even if I'm not even gonna mention that as a solution. Never mind. So those would be my immediate thoughts. A great resource for information. Please don't let me blank on it. Oh goodness, I'm gonna have to figure this out like right now before we end this. There's one more solution, and I cannot think of the name of it, that has a ton of great content and resources that's really valuable for recruiting. So I'm going to type this in and figure that out. But the other question, advice for making a candidate feel comfortable. So I'm trying to think of, you obviously don't want it to be just small talk for 15 minutes, but trying to think of to make them feel comfortable. I'm like, wait, how do I make them feel comfortable?
Maybe not being quite so formal all the time is a good way.
Yeah, because there's a fine line between having questions that you plan on asking them and making it seem like it's still conversational rather than, okay, so what do you do what is your job today? I don't know how to describe that. So having a prepared list of ideal questions, but feeling comfortable, you as the interviewer, knowing that you're not going to ask one by, go in order of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You're kind of going to go with where they answer and then dig in from there. Because I think there's that, you don't want to ask too much about family stuff, but I think one of the easiest questions that oftentimes will be not used to being asked is like, what motivates you? That in and of itself can open up a really interesting, you might see the light kind of go up and be like, oh, interesting. They're curious about what are you passionate about? What are you motivated by? Those are questions that aren't necessarily like, so tell me about your family. Because I think when we think about make someone feel comfortable, that means tell me about your personal life and tell me about your family. But I think you can ask different questions more around like who are they as an individual? What are your personal values? That's another one. And then they're like, ooh, and they get excited about that.
Particularly since you mentioned earlier, like the importance of things like appreciating employees. And, right now, since the job market is so tight, showing interest in why are they interested in this? What is it that gets them going is a great way to make them more comfortable because you're allowing them to talk about what they like and where their comfort area is.
Absolutely. Oh, is it this one? It might be Workable. Yes. Workable has a a tab on their website called hiring resources. And they've got hiring templates, hiring tutorials. So just as resources and whatnot, I definitely would pop over to Workable. Great source there. What is your advice for candidates who are finishing some of these boot camps and are finishing their degrees and gaining long-term employment? Currently doing both. Most of the companies say we need, I'm thinking about that question. Right, you're wanting to make sure you've got something lined up for when you do graduate, it sounds like. Drop in the chat if that's what you mean before, that way I don't answer this in the wrong way. But you know, I have talked with candidates recently who have done that, you know, where they're like, well, I'm looking to start something in Q2 of 2022. And I, you know, at that time, I'm like, okay, well, the thing that I've got right now is pretty immediate. So this won't be a good fit, but let us stay in touch. I think, okay, right now, I would say it honestly doesn't make sense entirely to be actively applying to positions that you see posted, because if they are actively posted right now, those are all most likely looking for someone who can interview, put in a 2 weeks notice and make a move. But what I do think is valuable in this time is to be reaching out to LinkedIn connections who clearly are hiring managers. So with, say you're going through, if you're going through a boot camp right now, I'm going to assume that you might be reaching out to people who are software development managers and connecting with them on LinkedIn and saying, hi, Sally, because of course Sally is the software development manager. Okay. Hi, Sally. I'm graduating and will be in February of 2022. I'm really interested in your company. It looks like you do really interesting work. So I wanted to reach out to you to hopefully stay in touch for the future. So sending those, I want to stay in touch for the future LinkedIn connections to the hiring managers. HR people are great too, but the more you can connect with the software development manager and they know that someone like you is going to be looking, they're motivated. They're the ones who feel the pain of not having their jobs filled. So those are the people that you want to be connecting with on LinkedIn. But also take that time to make sure that your stuff is lined up. Are you contributing to, again, I'm taking this from the aspect of you might be in tech. If you're contributing to projects on GitHub, or if you're a designer, you're adding to your Behance, or you're making sure that your portfolio or your own personal website is looking great to where when you do start looking, you're good to go there. And then also maybe connecting with recruiters and letting them know that when you'll be looking, because they can make notes in their system that someone like yourself will be available at a certain time. And so make recruiter connections, let them know where you're at and when you'll be looking.
So for someone who is still a student, would it be possible to maybe look at some moonlighting opportunities, as you were saying, some part-time stuff to get a foot in and resume build that way?
Yeah.
Instead of looking for jobs, maybe jobs that are currently hiring for 2 weeks from now, but are not requiring so much of your time.
Yes. So a couple of things, and don't hate me, and I know you've got so much free time and just so much energy to do all this extra stuff that I'm about to recommend. I understand. So take it with a grain of salt. A couple of things. I think again, if we're looking at it from a tech perspective or a design perspective, or even if this could be any job. Your local dentist, your local vet clinic, your local chiropractor, massage therapist most likely has a terrible website, or most likely doesn't have any type of financial operating system in place, or doesn't have X, Y, and Z, most likely, right? Because they're good at what they do. I'm a chiropractic and everything else, I'm kind of just taking it as I can. If you're open to volunteering your experience or pro bono, or maybe if you really need to and you don't have time to work for free, I totally get it. Maybe you do it at this incredibly cheap price. But if you're willing to do it pro bono, you have projects now to list on your resume for and point to specific people that you've done it for. And you can come in and say, hey, I'd love to come in and help you set up some budget forecasting models that you can input your data in and whatnot. My Google Home, I don't know, must have triggered her. So being able to do some pro bono projects, if you're a student, moonlighting, yes, absolutely. If you're open to doing that, I think you can immediately take projects. High school freshmen, high school sophomores are getting paid to do development work, these days. So it is don't hold yourself back just because you're a student at all. You've got talent already within you. So don't worry about the degree being the stamp of approval that people need. But yeah, so pro bono work. And then the other thing, and this is going to be a real off the wall. You're going to be like, what? Start creating TikToks around the work that you do. I'm just going to let that sit in the air for a minute. I'm not joking. I think that it builds a personal brand and it gets you potentially out of your comfort zone. And you're also displaying, it could be TikToks around what you're learning in the courses that you're doing. It could be advice and insight based on what you've learned to potential companies or businesses. I just think that that's something to really get ahead of your career, is a great place to start for personal branding. Which I know is crazy.
That's a good tip. I will just add one thing on from an employer's perspective, because this has happened to us as a firm before. If you're a student and you are looking to moonlight, or you are looking for that internship to volunteer services or do a discount services, keep in mind that you only want to take that on if it's reasonably manageable for your schedule and how many things that you have on your plate, because taking on something like that can turn into a negative if you're not able to do a good job or not able to meet the expectations. Then you're kind of being counterproductive, because instead of building a great reputation and a great job, you're kind of building a not so great reputation by not being able to do whatever it is that you've promised. So make sure you have realistic expectations of your own time and abilities and your schedule. These are all great things, like Bri said, and all the free time that you have. But if in that assessment you don't have that free time, I don't know that you don't take it on.
Right.
Unless you can make time for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because then it gets to an awkward place. It's much better to, under promise and over deliver, so. I just added my LinkedIn in the chat, and that way, if we're not already connected, make sure to add me there. I live on LinkedIn a lot of the times. It's worth mentioning. A friend of mine, if you only have a LinkedIn, if you feel like, I've got a LinkedIn profile, but you haven't done anything with it and you are job searching, I'm not sure of the demographic of folks that are on the call right now, but a friend of mine who I love, trust, respect, and partner with a lot, she created a LinkedIn course to help you level up your LinkedIn, represent yourself in the best way possible. So I think she's got 10% off on the course. I think it's normally 60. She's got a 10% off thing right now. But it's got like 4 or 5 parts to the series. She's amazing. So if you're willing to do a little bit of investment and want to really, because I think a lot of people have a LinkedIn profile, but they're not hearing back on their applications, or they are not getting recruiting messages from recruiters. And there's ways to really optimize your LinkedIn to make sure that those things are not happening. So that's an option too. Happy to send you the information if that's something you want.
Yeah, so we're kind of out of time, but just to remind everyone, Bri has several services under Bri Co.
I like to do a lot of things. I cannot just do one.
Yeah. I'm not that way at all. I don't know what you're talking about. So talent attraction and acquisition for businesses, Bri Crow Creative Studios, and local media production, as well as being a fantastic photographer. So if you're looking for Bri, you can find her at hello@bricrow.co and connect with her on LinkedIn and check out the podcast, Local and Thriving.
Yes, I love it. Thank you so much. I love talking about this stuff. So I appreciate you giving me an opportunity.
Sure. If anyone has any dire questions, we'll open it up for another minute or two. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today with Sharks and Heels. I really appreciate your support.
Yeah, I will linger around. Happy to chat or game plan if anybody. I'm not rushed for time, so happy to answer any questions if anybody's got anything. But thanks for pulling this together, Mishty. I know this is busy on your end as well, so I appreciate you making it happen.
Yeah, let me know. Yeah, hopefully, because I think a lot of people are looking to hire, or they're looking to get hired and transition at the beginning of the year. So we will try to get this recording of today's meeting sort of edited and posted up. So if you know anyone else who's interested, please share it when we send it out.
Very cool. All right. Well, I'm so grateful that y'all found it valuable. That means a lot. So I will stay tuned. I'll obviously share the recording once it's out there, Mishty.
Thanks.
All right.
All right, you guys. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Yeah.
Yes. Happy holidays.
Bye.
All right. Bye, Mishty. Bye, everyone. See you around.